Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male, made in the image of God, our Creator, strong, dominant, and in control, and we don't apologize for it. Today, I think it's a very cool episode because of the guests that we have. An old friend of mine recently got back from a deployment. I know that he speaks some Russian, and I'm not sure if he speaks any other languages. We served together on an active shooter response team. He's a real-life professional gunfighter and a believer and follower of Jesus Christ. And today we discuss hand-to-hand combat. I got a request for this. My experience mostly is in the Western wrestling, I guess what we call just kind of street fighting, mixed martial arts, punching, kicking. He has a much more broad experience in different disciplines from around the world, and I thought it would be a great resource. And he was kind enough to come on the podcast to talk about hand-to-hand combat today. So I'll plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the topic. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. Check out goodshepherdtraining.com, and if you want to, go to Patreon. The link's right on there. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, a teacher, a preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God. called by God to share the good news, a teacher, a preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic.
All right, so for our first call-in guest to the Alpha Male podcast is an old friend of mine, August. He has been in the Army Reserve for 14 years. He's also a former Reserve police officer, and he has quite a bit of hand-to-hand combat experience. August, you want to go ahead and give us a little bit of your hand-to-hand combat experience?
I have studied quite a number of martial arts over the years, so I've been introduced to a lot of different philosophies when it comes to fighting. But I think, most people who have actually been in a fight, going back to, I think it was Mike Tyson who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, all the training comes into play. But I've definitely studied quite a few martial arts over the years. See, the ones that I've studied most in depth, would probably be Shorin-ryu karate, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then Muay Thai kickboxing. So those were the three that I did initially. First started studying those back in, I think it was 2001 is when I started studying those.
Okay.
Did those solid for a couple of years, and then just life took me in other locations, and as a result, I had to leave the school I was training at, and got the opportunity to train at a number of other locations and see what those were like.
I got you. And you also have done a little bit of Systema and Krav Maga, is that correct?
Yes. So more recently, I think back in, 2014 or so, I got introduced to Russian Systema, which, for those who are not familiar with it, was developed for the Russian Special Forces, the Spetsnaz. I understand it was also for Stalin's bodyguards, but in general, I would describe it as the Russian version of Krav Maga. And then even more recently than that, I also studied actual Krav Maga at a couple of different locations.
Okay. You know a lot more about this than I do. I was looking into it. So Systema is a fairly recent thing, right? A fairly recent discipline adapted from older ones. I imagine the mid 90s is what I saw.
Well, if you go into the history and you ask them about the history, they will tell you that it has its origins in the Cossacks.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, so more like 1700s and 1800s for the origin. And then it was more or less formalized into what they called the system, hence Systema. More recently, the art was kind of coming to prominence in the 30s and 40s, like I mentioned, Stalin's bodyguards.
Okay.
And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Vasilyev, who is considered kind of the grandmaster of the art, along with Mikhail Robko, they started up the schools and started going international with teaching this system that was previously restricted only to Russian special forces, and started teaching it internationally.
So that kind of the West didn't really get a taste of that until kind of the Iron Curtain fell.
Correct. That's where
Okay.
you probably saw the emerge, where it started to emerge in the 90s.
Okay, that's probably, like I said, I'm sure you know more about it than I do. And then Krav Maga is as I understand it, the Israeli version of that, fairly modern version of probably adapted to older disciplines.
Yeah, so I don't know as much about the history of Krav Maga. It's my understanding, and someone who's probably an actual Krav Maga practitioner as a primary standard will correct me, but it's my understanding that it was developed for the Israeli Defense Forces, and it was more or less taking what they consider to be the best parts of other martial arts and then putting them together.
I got it. So that makes sense. It's kind of like the mixed martial arts of the Israeli Defense Force.
Correct. And because it was designed to be taught to the Israeli Defense Forces, instead of being a traditional martial art where you go to one or two classes every week and then you work your way up through the ranks, it was originally designed as like a 2 or 3 week hand-to-hand combat program to take a person who had zero combat experience whatsoever and then bring them up to a moderate level of fighting ability in only a few weeks.
That's pretty cool. So it's like the crash course in hand-to-hand combat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that's where it originally came from. And then, of course, it got popularized and then expanded. And now there's a number of different Krav Maga organizations, Krav Maga Worldwide. I think there's Krav Maga USA. I lost track. There's like 5 or 6 of them.
Okay. But do you want to speak at all about like the underlying philosophy of those martial arts, the other ones you studied, how they differ, how they're the same?
Well, let's see. Krav Maga, of course, because it borrows from other martial arts, will have a lot of the tactics or principles from the arts that it draws from. So, for instance, it draws quite heavily from boxing or kickboxing, such as Muay Thai.
Oh, okay.
So having already previously studied Muay Thai, when I started taking Krav Maga, I was able to adjust to the slight nuances pretty well because that's where it was heavily based from.
Okay. So I didn't know that. So a lot of leg work then, I assume.
Not as much leg work. It focused more on the hands, but there was some leg work in there.
Wrestling?
But
Like grappling or no?
so not originally.
Okay.
So from my understanding, the original Krav Maga manual, when it came to ground fighting, was basically one sentence: "Don't get on the ground."
Oh, that's kind of surprising because a lot of fights in my experience end up on the ground.
Which is why they later added a ground component for
Okay.
which they borrowed from jiu-jitsu.
Oh, okay. And then Systema, is there any underlying philosophy? I imagine that's quite different than our other martial Western arts that we're familiar with or I'm familiar with.
Yeah, so when I started learning Systema, I was shocked to find out that they had a completely different philosophy from any other martial art that I'd studied.
Yeah,
Previously I'd done.
I
Yeah,
imagine that's kind of
previously I'd
like the
done.
Cyrillic alphabet where it's just you look at it and you're like, what is this?
Oh yeah, yeah. And of course, once you get used to it, it's not so bad. But with Systema, they had a different way of throwing punches. They had a different way of defense, offense, and so on. Like I've studied a number of different martial arts, including the karate, the kickboxing, but I've also dabbled with Aikido. I've dabbled with Casey fighting method, which is another interesting one. A couple different varieties of karate, Wing Chun Kung Fu. I've dabbled with a bunch of those other more well-known arts, and
Okay.
then when I started doing the Systema, it was radically different.
Okay. Different than the Eastern and the Western, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So the principles in Systema were mostly based around a mindset and also the principles of relaxation.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's
So,
quite different.
so for instance, like in a traditional martial art, I'm going to use karate for a nice, easy, well-known art. In a karate, the punch is driven from the ground. You've got the foot movement, you've got the hip rotation, and then you're using that force pushing off of the ground and trying to pack all of that energy into that 2 inches at the front of your fist.
I'm familiar with that from Western boxing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty similar.
So it's a very rigid style of punch, and when you punch in that kind of a fashion, there's going to be some back energy where some of the shock of whatever it is that you're hitting is going to come back into your body.
Sure.
So, for instance, if you have a baseball bat and you swing it and you hit it against, say, a pole, you are going to feel that shock come back up into your arm because of how rigid it is.
Yeah, for sure.
So a Systema punch, they actually refer to it as a ballistic punch. And so the fist is actually disconnected from the rest of the body from the shoulder. So instead of having the punch move from the ground, from the feet up through the body with hip rotation, the arm is moving independently of the rest of the body.
Like a whip?
Yeah, exactly. So think
Okay.
more like a ball on the end of a chain.
Yeah, okay. I'm following that. That seems like that could be pretty effective.
Yeah. So if you have a ball on an end of a chain and I swing that against, say, a wall or a pole or something else, you still have that energy that's going to hit the target of whatever it is you're swinging it at. But because it's on a chain, you're not going to actually feel that energy, that shock travel back up into the rest of your body.
That makes a lot of sense, but it seems like you're using a lot less of your body. So are you not striking as hard?
So it's a really weird mechanic. I'm sure if you were actually to put it up on a pressure plate, the karate style punch probably does deliver more pounds of energy per inch. The Systema punch is deceptively strong, though.
Huh. I imagine there's other benefits to that because, for instance, when you get hit, generally if you relax, you don't get hurt as bad. Like for trauma. So maybe there's some other benefits to that. I'm not sure. I'm not a doctor, but it seems like for instance, if you get thrown to the ground, if you're relaxed, generally that helps.
Yeah, and that's also their principle for being hit. So a lot of martial arts, if you're going to do something where you're going to be, say, hitting your core, in your stomach or solar plexus area, you tense up. Systema teaches to do the complete opposite. So instead of tensing when and where you get hit, instead, they want to relax the body at the point of impact and then give kind of a passive resistance. So it acts as a dampener.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, both seem to make sense. So I guess you're more the subject matter expert since you've done both and I haven't. Wait, do you think there's benefits to both, or do you think one system is better than the other?
So what I found with tensing the core upon being hit is that you can withstand a hit up to a point.
I gotcha.
So when you reach that point, you break. So it becomes strong but brittle.
I gotcha. That makes sense.
With the relaxation, it's more like trying to hit a rubber band.
So it's going to hurt more continually, but it's not catastrophic.
Actually, it hurts less.
Oh, really? I would have thought it would hurt
in my
more.
experience.
Because I would imagine.
So when I first started doing the Systema, one of my very first nights was an exercise where they were teaching you how to absorb a blow. And I've never before been in a martial arts class where you just stand there and let someone punch you in the stomach over and over again.
Well, you unfortunately missed out on the Marine Corps body hardening exercises where you basically just stand there and punch each other.
Okay. So this would have been a very helpful drill for that. So the first night that I did it, I had the wind knocked out of me a good dozen times over.
That sucks. Yeah.
So you see that punch coming at you, and tensing is a fear response.
Yeah.
So you automatically see it, you know it's going to hurt, and your body tenses and braces for the impact. And what typically happened was I'd get hit in the stomach, and I would exceed that ability to take the hit, and I would lose my wind. But once I started doing it for a while, and I started overcoming the fear of being hit, and started learning how to relax when getting hit. So when the punch lands on your stomach, for instance, instead of tensing your core and bracing for it, when it hits, you relax and you allow the punch to push the air out of you.
Oh, so you're intentionally losing your wind.
So you're intentionally allowing the air to exhale, but you're not forcing the air out.
It makes sense. It's so foreign to me from a Western point of view and all the experience that I've had. That's like like you said, the complete opposite.
And it definitely took a while to get used to, and they work your way up to it. They don't just sit there and hit you full force on the first night. They show you what the mechanics are and show you how to do it, and then they work up to it. So after a few months of doing the Systema, it got to the point where I wouldn't say that I could take like a knockout hit, but I can take a very solid hit to the stomach and not lose my wind.
Yeah, it just seems the thing that sticks out to me is I've been hit plenty of times, been in plenty of fights, and tensing up seems to help. When I get punched in the kidneys, as you probably know, you can't tense up your kidneys. When you get punched in the kidneys, it freaking hurts.
Oh yeah.
So it seems
taking a kidney hit hurts.
So it seems like if you got punched somewhere in the front, like with an organ, like I guess your rib cage protects it. But it seems like getting punched in the stomach without tensing up would really, really hurt. But like I
And
said,
it
I've
is
never practiced
completely
it. So
counterintuitive.
okay, yeah. I mean, it's a thing.
A
I mean, so it must have some merit.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago or so, I was talking with a guy who was a boxer, and I was telling him a little bit about the Systema. And I made that statement that I could take a fairly solid hit in the stomach without losing my wind. Of course, at that point, he goes, "Can I hit you?" And I'm like, "Well, I really can't make a statement like that and then not let
Yeah,
you hit me."
yeah. You can't wuss out now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I sat there, took the stuff out of my pocket, set it to the side, and I was like, "All right, have at it." And of course, this is a guy who, he's a boxer. He knows how to throw a punch, and he sits there and he, gets his stance, he gets his feet, and then he sits there and he just lays one right into me, right into my stomach. And I allowed the hit to happen. I exhaled. I allowed the punch to push the air out of me, and then I stood straight back up, and I had no debilitating effects right at that moment.
Huh.
And he looked at me. He's like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" And I started laughing. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." Now the thing is, he apparently did hit me a little harder than I anticipated and planned, because my stomach was still sore for about 5 days after.
Oh, I mean, that's just fighting. That's one of the reasons I don't train much anymore is that even when you win a fight, you generally get hurt.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's kind of why I stopped participating in competition, was because I didn't want to hurt someone else or be hurt for entertainment purposes.
yeah, when you have a professional career like us as professional gunfighters, if you break your fingers, that kind of sucks.
Hmm.
And it's pretty
Right.
common you get in a fight too. It's pretty common you get in a fight even if you win to bust your knuckles, get a swollen hand, broken fingers, broken nose. All that stuff's pretty common.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. So I stopped. Like, I used to be very into the competition thing. I started studying the traditional martial arts back when I was like 17. I participated in a couple of karate tournaments, and then when I got a job working for a police department, later joining the military, my mindset toward fighting started to shift, and I started to shift away from traditional martial arts, which, borrowing Bruce Lee's words, tend to be more concerned about preserving tradition than actually finding the most effective means of fighting.
yeah. You'll find that in any discipline with shooting, with teaching schools, with a lot of things. With military training, as you know, they're a lot more concerned about tradition, like polished boots and effectiveness sometimes. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
um,
absolutely. So my mindset stopped focusing around the idea of actually doing a competition, and more or less, I started focusing on, okay, what am I going to do in order to survive?
yeah,
And so I stopped studying karate. I stopped studying jujitsu because jujitsu, when I first started studying jujitsu, it was very much a self-defense philosophy. And then over the years that I was doing jujitsu, I watched it change from being self-defense oriented to fighting in an octagon.
yeah, that
So
makes sense.
so things like UFC became very popular. When I first started doing it, no one had ever heard of UFC, but after a few years, UFC gained in popularity, and then the mindset in jiu-jitsu started shifting to winning a street fight to winning in an octagon.
Winning UFC, yeah, and I like UFC. Don't get me wrong; it's great, and I think anything that gets more American young men into the martial combat arena is good. But you have to realize that MMA is a sport. It has rules. You wear,
Mm-hmm.
gloves. You can't kick somebody in the head when they're on the ground.
Mm-hmm. And of
Which
course,
a
the
real street
original
fight is not like that.
and, and of course the original UFC was designed as a mixed martial arts thing, where they really did want to see which martial art was best, and it didn't have weight
Yeah,
classes, didn't have time limits, didn't have rounds, and I think it only had like 3 rules, like no eye gouging, no biting,
yeah,
and I think there was a third one. I can't remember what it was.
yeah, yeah. Those are pretty good rules
Um,
to have.
yeah, so those were the only things, and then they started introducing the time limits and the rounds, and they started allowing people to wear gloves, because it turns out when you punch someone in the face, you break knuckles.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's one of the reasons. Yeah, I guess a good time for me to get in. I don't know if you listen to the Alpha Male podcast, but I generally plug in a bio. But I don't generally talk about my hand-to-hand experience. I'll talk a little bit about that now, if you don't mind, just so we can
Go ahead.
compare and contrast. So I grew up. I was to be honest, completely honest, before I was a Christian, I was kind of a punk, and I fought a lot. Like I like just street fought a lot, just for the mutual combat of it growing up. And then when I got into high school, I started wrestling, and I kind of gave up that because, as you said, when you fight, you just get hurt a lot. And I kind of liked actually competing, so I wrestled in high school. For 3 years. I was one of the captains of the wrestling team. There's quite a bit of wrestling experience there. And then obviously with the Marine Corps, I did Marine Corps martial arts. And I also did an LAPD. They study mixed martial arts, and you can do that in LAPD as part of your training. And I did mixed martial arts. One of my instructors was Big John McCarthy. I'm sure you know him from UFC. One of the big referees from UFC, Big John McCarthy, is one of our teachers, but very much ground fighting. And then, as you can imagine, my years in LAPD and law enforcement, I can't remember the number of times I got in actual, what I would call legit fights, like hand-to-hand combat, which is not quite the same because you're a cop, so you have a little bit of advantage there. But still, I mean, hand-to-hand combat on the street is a real thing. So that's pretty much my experience in that. And so I guess all my experience is more straight Western style, boxing, wrestling, and MMA. And I guess just fighting for mutual combat when I was younger, which when I became a Christian, I realized was stupid and unwarranted. But I think there's definitely a time for mutual combat and for sport and training.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I won't claim to have a whole lot of practical like street fighting experience. Most of my actual real life fighting experience has been either when I was working for the police department or when working with the special response team. So for instance, just this past weekend, had to arrest a guy, had to grab him, put him on the ground and put the cuffs on him. But as far as like martial art applicability to that situation, there really wasn't a whole lot because it was something that started and then it was over within about 15 seconds. The fight started, you grab them, you put them on the ground, and now there's two other guys assisting you with wrestling the guy into the cuffs. So there's not a whole lot of actual application of the different martial systems that you learn at various schools.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised when you said Krav Maga didn't have a lot of ground fighting, because in my experience, even if you start off toe to toe, it very quickly almost always goes to the ground unless you get a KO pretty quick.
Right. And that was the original philosophy in Krav Maga, was just don't go to the ground. But obviously, as you're aware, most fights do go to the ground. So eventually Krav Maga did add a ground component to it, which they borrowed heavily from jiu-jitsu.
Okay, I got you. I'm not super familiar with jiu-jitsu. I'm familiar with obviously Greco-Roman and collegiate wrestling, which I imagine a lot of it is similar, but probably a lot of it is not.
The thing that I like about Greco-Roman and like high school wrestling, college wrestling type stuff is that it does teach you how to be calm, and it does teach you how to move on the ground.
Yeah. And as you know, like you said about Systema, is that when you get, I guess, I don't know, super excited and full of adrenaline, if you don't relax, you get tired really, really fast.
Yes, very much so.
And if you're the guy that can stay calm under pressure, if you are semi-evenly matched, or even if you're even less matched, if you can stay calm and think, you generally do better.
Yes, I would agree with that 100%. I'm not a very large person. I'm only, 5'5" and about 150 pounds. And what I generally tell people is that my technique will beat size, weight, and strength. However, if I'm up against a guy who has size, weight, and strength and some technique, then I'm sunk.
Yeah, I mean, size and weight's a real thing. As you know, I mean, we know each other in real life. As you know, I'm just built different, but I'm not a big guy either. And size and weight's a real thing. I mean, that's a real thing. I'm not going to back down from a fight that needs to be fought, no matter how big the guy is, but it definitely helps. But I got some questions we'll go over. I guess if
go ahead.
The average guy that's like, you know what, I grew up in the suburbs and I went to school and I didn't do any kind of martial, I've never been punched in the face. I've never done anything like that. I want to be better equipped. Is there a place you would recommend them to start?
Well, whenever someone asks me about martial arts, I always ask them what their goals are. What do they want to get out of the martial art? If they're looking for things like fitness or anything like that, then generally a kickboxing class is going to be what I recommend them to. If they're really interested in tradition and ancient martial arts, it depends on which culture they're most interested in. So I'll either push them more toward a karate, taekwondo, or a kung fu type martial art. If they say that they want to have self-defense, then I generally steer people away from the more traditional Eastern martial arts, and I really do recommend the Krav Maga. If you want to go from zero to combat effectiveness in the shortest amount of time possible, I would say Krav Maga.
Okay, that's great.
If you're looking for something that you can spend a little bit more time on, and you're going to spend a little bit more devotion to the principles and the techniques, then I push people toward the Systema.
Okay. So
Systema will have a longer learning curve. I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
No, that you were already on your way there. That's great. So Systema is a longer barrier to entry, but probably in the long term, if you're going to devote yourself better.
Yes, that's a pretty good way of putting it. If you're willing to put in the time and effort, then I think the Systema is the way to go. The problem is it's hard to find Systema schools. There's only a few dozen of them which are accredited across the United States.
Makes sense. Yeah, just you describing trying to relax while getting punched in the stomach made me think that would take a while.
Yeah, and you really have to condition yourself, and it's really counterintuitive because you will stand there and you will slap each other in the face. You will punch each other in the stomach. Yeah. When they do their knife training, they typically do it with live blade.
That's kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah. Now, they're not trying to necessarily stab or hurt each other, but they do work with actual knives because, again, they're trying to get you accustomed to overcoming the fear associated with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. You and I both have a little bit of knife fighting experience, which is great. Maybe we'll do that on a future episode. Let's see what else. What is your go-to EDC gun right now?
Well, let's see. It depends on what I'm doing. I mean, if for every day at the moment, Glock 19 is kind of the go-to. Okay. Although my general preference is actually the Glock 32, which is the same size, but in 357 SIG. As you're fully aware, I'm a big fan of the 357 SIG.
Yeah, it's a great round. How are you liking that STI or the Staccato?
Yeah. I just picked up a Staccato the other day. I mean, it shoots beautifully. The sights took me a little bit to get used to because you have to stack the sights instead of do a combat hold.
Yeah. Okay.
So I kept hitting high and having to remind myself that I needed to stack my target instead of cover my target.
Yeah, that's hard. That's a hard thing to transition from. That's kind of like going from Systema to something else, probably.
Mm-hmm,
if you've got a bunch of practice on one thing, it is hard to go back and forth.
Yeah, I do plan on putting a like a hollow sun or something along those lines on it.
Yeah, I've been recently messing. Well, as you know, not on the podcast, but I talked to you recently. For the past couple of months, I've been training with the red dot, and it's kind of like you said, a different discipline. It's quite different, and it takes quite a bit of practice, but I think it is better in the long term.
Yeah, and that's been one of my hiccups. Is I've always been kind of averse to using anything with batteries, but
yeah, me too.
I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. It's not going to be a duty gun. It's going to be more of a fun gun or competition gun. But maybe if I get used to it enough for those purposes, I'll start branching out and using it more for a duty purpose.
Gotcha. And I guess to bring it back around to fighting, I guess I would say that whatever discipline you pick, pick one and get semi-proficient at it. Because if you're semi-proficient, you're going to know more than most people that you get in a fight with, because the vast majority of the population doesn't have a ton of training and experience in the hand-to-hand combat. If you watch the average people, like in a bar fight or on a fight that they don't know what they're doing, you can easily tell that they don't. And if you just pick one, whether it's Systema or wrestling or kickboxing, if you get even semi-proficient, that's going to give you a huge advantage.
And every martial art, regardless of what it is going to be better than no martial art.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say it's kind of like working out. I don't care if you do freaking Tai Bo or CrossFit or, powerlifting. Doing something and doing it consistently is better than doing nothing and debating on which one might be better in philosophy.
Yeah, and I don't want it to appear like I'm bashing on any particular martial art. I study so many different martial arts because I want to learn what those different philosophies are, and I take the things that I like and I keep them, and the things that I don't like I get rid of.
Yeah, just
so
like
I have So I have dabbled with Aikido. Oh gosh, let me see if I can think of what all the ones I've done. Let's see: Shotoe-ryu Karate, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai. I did a little bit of Shotokan. I tried some Kempo. Let's see, did a little bit of Aikido. I did Casey Fighting Method, KFM. That's actually a Spanish martial art.
I was not even aware. That was not even on my radar.
Yeah, that one is what was taught to Christian Bale for the Batman movies, and also Tom Cruise for the Jack Reacher movies.
Okay.
So that one, I would put that one in the same class as like Krav Maga.
Okay, so very practical, down to earth, like for real world situations.
Yeah, it's got a heavy emphasis on protecting the head and attacking and defense at the same time.
That's great. That's important. You get punched in the head, you can get knocked out real quick, no matter how good you are.
So yeah, that's another one that I would put in the class of Krav Maga. That one was really interesting to study. And then of course the Systema, the Krav Maga. I did a little bit of Wing Chun. That was interesting, and all of them had a different mindset and philosophy on how to do fighting, and each one taught me something.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great attitude to have for anything, for any man to go into something. Like I said, you and I know our bios for shooting and stuff, and I'll routinely take a very basic pistol shooting course, because the second you think that you're too good to learn something from anybody, then you're probably an arrogant person that's probably not going to learn anything.
And what I would recommend when it comes to the martial arts is master the basics of whatever martial art it is that you're studying, because 80% of being able to fight well is having those fundamentals down for whatever art that is.
Yeah, same with shooting, same with almost anything. Like if you got the fundamentals in shooting, you'll do well. If your fundamentals suck, it doesn't matter how much high speed reload stuff you know. If your fundamentals suck, you can't shoot.
And again, borrowing words from Bruce Lee, more afraid of the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times than the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once.
Nice.
I might be misquoting that slightly.
That's all right. But I think that's a good way to wrap up the podcast, man. I've really enjoyed having you on, and obviously you're an old friend. I enjoy talking to you. For those of you, nobody knows, I guess, but we used to work together on the special response team, which is pretty great. I'd love to have you back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess I should mention, and I'll take it out if you have a problem with it, but I'd love to mention that we're both believers and followers of Jesus Christ.
I have no problem with mentioning that whatsoever.
Which to me is more important than all the stuff we talked about, man. Well, thanks, man. I'm glad you were willing to come on. I really appreciate you, and hopefully I talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much,
man.
With that, men, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. These are free to listen to, but sadly they're not free to produce and put out. So if you want to be a contributing member, a supporter of the tribe you're now a part of, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. If you want to support financially, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com and go down to Patreon. Also, if you just want to go out there and check out some cool pictures and things like that. Again, your one-stop shop, goodshepherdtraining.com. Get out there, be strong, and prove yourself a man, and have a blessed day.